As you can tell, I'm not from San Francisco. I look a little uptight, um, but that's all right. So the title of my presentation is Educating the Whole Child and Adult with Emotional Literacy. And I thought I would start off with asking you how you're feeling. How's everybody doing? Yeah? All right. I could use a little bit more energy. Okay. So as you can see up here, we call this the mood meter. And what I'm going to do now is just teach you a little bit more about emotions. On that x-axis, we're going to talk about our subjective state right now. So subjectively speaking, a positive 5, which is the sort of far end of in the green, would be that today is subjectively the best experience of your life. Now, we're not going to make those claims yet. Negative 5, sort of near unpleasantness, would be that this is the worst experience. Sort of, you're at the end of your rope. It's couldn't be anything worse than being at a presentation like this. Anybody there? Okay. On the y-axis, we have energy, thinking about your physiology. The top in the red right now, if you're high energy, would mean that you're just, you're ready to explode. You want to take over this workshop. You're like, I can do this training. In the bottom, in the low energy, you'd sort of feel like you're in the deepest pool of despair. Is anybody there? And then we'll put these two axes together to figure out how we're feeling. So how many of you are in the yellow, feeling high energy and pleasant? Raise your hand. Okay, just some feedback. It doesn't really look that way. High energy and pleasant, raise your hand. All right. How many of you are in the green, feeling sort of, you're pleasant, but your energy's a little low? Okay, we got a lot of people in the green. Anybody in the blue, feeling a little low energy, unpleasant? So no one's there. How about the red? That would be great for me. You're unpleasant with a lot of energy. Yeah. Anybody there? I'll just make sure I walk the other way. What I'd like you to do right now is take a moment and think about where exactly you are in this tool. And I'm going to give you 3 seconds. And I'd like you in those 3 seconds to come up with the best word that describes your exact experience that you're having right now. 3, 2, 1. Quick raise of hands, just for curiosity. How many of you had trouble finding the right word? Put your hands up high. Look really high. Be proud to be illiterate. That's okay. Sorry about that. Just look away. Keep your hand up. Keep your hand up. Please look around the room. So isn't it interesting? I can ask you how you're feeling. You say, oh, I'm pretty pleasant. How's your energy? It's pretty high, pretty low. But then I ask you to find the right word, and for some reason we have difficulty with that. And as we now know, there are lots of words that describe our feeling states, but most of us use just a few. We use, if you're in the yellow, you feel great. If you're in the green, you're fine. If you're in the blue, you're sort of, eh. If you're in the red, you're pissed. But we know that there is much more to our emotion vocabulary than those 4 words, maybe 2,000 words in the English language dictionary to describe our feelings. And the question is, why don't we use those words more regularly? So my job today is to sort of take you through a roller coaster and ask you one question before I really go into my presentation, which is, a lot of you were in the green and in the yellow today, but how many of you work with educators and students who come to school in the blue and the red? Yeah, we have a lot of students in our schools that are feeling down, maybe somewhat depressed. How many of you have anxious students in your classrooms? Yeah. And the question is, what do we do on a regular basis to make sure that all children and educators have strategies to manage their emotional lives? And the work that I do argues that emotions matter, and they matter a great deal for 4 primary things in our laboratory. The first is that they affect your attention and learning. So if you're bored right now, which I hope you're not, you're likely not paying attention to my presentation. You're doing your grocery list or something like that. We know emotions affect our decision making. How many of you have ever made a bad decision? How many of you maybe made a bad decision when you were about 18 years old in college? Yeah. Was that a cognitive decision or an emotional-based decision? We won't go into the details right now. And how many of you have ever had a bad day? And you've gone home, and you've been ignored? Anybody have that experience? Yeah, he's in a bad mood. Let's just go the other way. So we know that emotions drive our relationships, that our facial expressions, for example, when we go home or when we're in our classroom, dictate how people respond to us. And finally, when we think about most disorders that are prevalent in today's world, like anxiety and depression, Typically, they're failures at self-regulation and self-management. So the work that I do is not only thinking about how emotions impact these things, but really, what do we do with our emotions? And we have created a model which we call emotional literacy that talks about 5 critical skills and what we do to manage our emotional lives. And the first one is recognizing emotions. So I'm looking around at all of you right now. I'm trying to gauge your facial expressions. Are you interested? Are you pretending to be interested? Is it a fake or real interest? This woman just made a weird face at me. I'll take it as a joke. We think about the understanding of emotion. What is the reason for this emotional state? What caused that feeling state? And what are the consequences of that state? Then we think about the labeling of emotions. What are the words that we use on a regular basis to describe our emotions? And how sophisticated is our emotional vocabulary? As we saw earlier, we could use some work in that area. And then we think about expressing emotion. How many of you have rules about how you express your emotions? How many of you don't know what I'm talking about? We all have rules. Some of us are very comfortable sharing our emotions. As a matter of fact, my brother, before he text messaged me, he said, "Do not share anything about our family." He's watching me right now and is going to kill me after this presentation. What he doesn't realize is that my whole presentation is really about my family. Anyway. And then we talk about regulating emotions, the strategies we use to manage emotions. How many of you would like to have more strategies to manage your emotional life? How many of you would like more strategies to help you manage other people's lives? All right. So that's what we call ruler. We have our approach that we call the ruler approach. And what our research does is we look at how these skills impact different outcomes. The first is student outcomes. And what we know that students who score high in our measures of emotional intelligence and emotional literacy, they have better quality relationships. They're less anxious and depressed. They perform better academically. Think about it. How many of you like to be around the angry, disgruntled, dysregulated student? We just don't like it. They're not comfortable to be around. When we think about what drives academic performance and standardized test performance, we're always thinking about the cognition piece. But maybe your ability to manage your anxiety during that test would be an important predictor. As a matter of fact, in my own life, I work at an Ivy League university now, but growing up in New Jersey, my mom passed away when I was just about taking the GREs. And I remember sitting in that room taking the GREs and being incapable, not capable of taking the test, and just looking at paragraphs and being delirious and saying to myself, I just can't take this test right now. But for some reason, there wasn't an adult in my environment that said, hey, take a break. Here's some strategies to help you manage that. Maybe wait a year. You're going through a terrible loss right now. What about teachers? Here's a student in one of our programs. You can see the bright eyes, the cheery face, paying attention, being astute. Educators. What do we know about emotionally literate educators? What we know is that they experience more positive emotions. They have better relationships. They enjoy teaching more. They're less stressed in their workplace. And we also, you can see this teacher right here, a kindergarten teacher, just full of enthusiasm, full of strategies to help motivate his students. Emotionally literate classrooms, what do you know about them? Well, in our work, we study not only the individual level variables, but we study the classroom climate. And what we do is we measure the emotional climate of classrooms through observational methods. And we use those variables to predict student outcomes like engagement, like their performance, like their behavior grades. And lo and behold, what we find is that classrooms that are high in emotional climate, controlling for the instructional skills, controlling for the organizational aspects of that classroom, have students who are more engaged and have students who perform better academically and who have students who behave better. You can see students in classrooms that are rated high, they work collaboratively together, they're enthused in their work. Okay, so I share with you so far that these skills of emotional literacy seem to predict things like social competence, mental and physical health, and academic performance. But people ask all the time, where do these skills come from? And obviously, it's like Psych 101. You got biology, and you have learning, nature, nurture. Think about your nature. How many of you are somewhat neurotic? Anybody? Okay. Anybody here like a little irritable in the morning? Yeah, I'm just like, I wake up irritable. I went to yoga this morning. I was so irritable in that class. And I was trying to regulate, and I was just like, I just got to get out of here. It was terrible. So we have our genetics. We have our temperament. And, I've been in therapy for 10 years, not any longer. I've written these books on social and emotional learning, and I still wake up a little irritable. I still wake up worried. I worry about why I worry, and I even worry about why I worry about why I worry. Anybody else like that? It's awful. And then we have our environment. We have nurture. We have all the people that have trained us from their own development, because they've had lots of education about this work and how to manage our emotional lives. I grew up in a family. I had good parents, but they didn't know a lot about emotions or about emotion management, that's for sure. I remember very vividly being at home, and I was a recalcitrant kind of kid who would talk back to his mother. My mother would, "Get to your room. Wait till your father gets home." And then I would be in my room waiting for my father to get home, and all of a sudden, I'd hear my mother downstairs, "Billy, you're not going to believe the way Marc spoke to me today." That was like, take a deep breath. And all of a sudden I hear my father coming up the stairs, and he'd open my bedroom door. "I thought I told you never to speak to your mother again." You learn how to read facial expressions at a very young age when that happens. And then my mother, who was a worrier, would come into the room and say something like, "Don't talk to him that way. That's not the way to handle this." And then they would go in the hallway and they'd get in an argument. It was amazing. And then typically, my father would be annoyed with me, he'd be annoyed at my mother, he'd go downstairs, and my mother would come back and say, "You know something, Marc? I saved you this time." Whoa, okay. So you wonder why I'm giving a presentation on emotional literacy. Anyway, my point behind my work is that there's no guarantee you have great genetics. There's no guarantee that you're going to be nurtured in an environment where you get taught these skills. And what I argue is, why not make sure that every child gets a formal education on emotion? Why not integrate it from kindergarten through high school, or better off from womb to tomb, and ensure that everyone has this kind of education? And think about your own life. What was your emotional education like? What did you learn? Did you come from a suppressor family? Did your parents coach you on emotions? Or we don't have, and I live in New England, so nobody has any feelings. It's amazing. I walk in the hallways and everyone's like, "Wait, hi, good morning." Yeah. My work began with students. I was interested in developing a program with my uncle, Marvin, who was a maverick educator, and he and I together wrote a book many years ago to teach middle school students how to manage their emotions and understand and discuss their emotions. And we went around like Willie Loman would go around, knocking on principals' doors, begging them to use our programs. And unfortunately, we failed horrifically. And we failed because we didn't realize that many educators just weren't comfortable with the material. They didn't feel like it was their place to start teaching about emotion. I remember vividly being in England, actually, and I was at this prestigious school in Canterbury, and this one teacher, right about 10 minutes into my presentation, hope I'm not there yet, she said, "My job is not to talk to my students about my feelings." So it's like 3,800 miles away from my house, and thinking, what am I going to do here? It's 9 o'clock, we're going to be here till 3. So I said, "Does anybody feel any different?" And this young guy, this really big guy, 6 foot, I was a little nervous. He raised his hand, he said, "Sir, can I make a comment?" I said, "Definitely." He said, "Well, I was a student in this high school, and she was my teacher." Anyway, we went on in our work to make sure that we train educators, that we develop programs so that educators themselves could develop their emotion skills, so that they felt valued and important themselves. Not just, here's a curriculum for your students, but here's something for you. But we realized very quickly that leaders of schools needed to be involved in this work too, because they'd be on their BlackBerrys during our training. They wouldn't even show up to some of our trainings. And we realized that unless the leaders of the schools are modeling these skills themselves, that we would fail, because leaders are the ones who make decisions in schools. And of course, we needed to get family involvement. So our model now is everybody with a face gets trained. And then we have some good things happening. I want to wrap up my day sharing with you a poem that was developed by a boy in England who was in a school that was quite impoverished. He was extensively bullied in elementary school and really hated school and didn't do well in school at all. And through the efforts that we made in his middle school, he wrote a poem describing his experiences. And I'll wrap up my presentation by debriefing it in 1 second. Please, if we can go to the tape.
You're ugly. I know, I have been told this. You're silly. I know, I have realized this. You look like an alien. I know this has been pointed out to me. You have big eyes. I know, I have looked in the mirror. You can't be a pilot, you're not smart enough. It is possible, I have considered this. With every insult you invent, it's strange but it's true. You point out my many failings and help me to improve. As you highlight my many weaknesses, you also highlight my strengths. My ugliness leads to my kind personality. My silliness brings laughter to the world. Our resemblance to movie aliens only highlights my intelligence. My big eyes portray my feelings and widen my view. I may not make it as a pilot, but I could be. You see, every insult you invent gives me a view into your mind. And though I have many problems, I feel sorry for you. Why, oh why, do I feel sorry for you? Because your mind cannot break free. The wall of insults you build limits your mind and feelings. So soon if you don't stop, you'll turn inhuman and have the biggest problem of all, loneliness. Think about it.
So, Gareth is my hero. I didn't grow up in a school where I had the opportunity to talk about my feelings. And I had similar life circumstances as he did. Now I'm older, I've gone to therapy, I've been able to learn about psychology through my own education, but in middle school I was not a happy camper. And what I'm so proud of is that the schools that we work with now are giving children the opportunity to learn these skills and strategies. So if I can ask everyone to just close their eyes and take a deep breath. And imagine a world in 3 years from now. Imagine schools where all educators and students are taught these skills, where empathy and compassion are the norm. What does it look like? What does it feel like? And I hope you see what I saw. And in closing, what I want to say, as an academic, I can't make audacious claims that emotional literacy training will solve all of our nation's schools' problems. But what I can say is that through my work with hundreds of schools and just thousands of teachers and students, that is a great place to start. Thank you.